The new Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook Wild Game Recipes for the Grill, Smoker, Campfire, and Camp Stove is out on April 24th and is available for pre-order now. Here is your book for everything that's best cooked or eaten outside. From grilling to open fire cooking to Dutch ovens to smokers to barbecue to backpacking meals to how to pull off the perfect fish fry, with pit stops along the way for lessons about Ice Age cooking methods and the best 5 ways to construct a cooking fire you can be proud of. And of course, we're focusing on wild game and fish here with over 100 recipes, including stuffed venison burgers 3 ways, wild duck with ahi verde sauce, a jerky made with cola, a gin and tonic made with fire-charred lemons, and grilled frog legs made with a sticky sweet sauce. This ain't your normal cookbook, so be prepared to be surprised. Pre-order your copy now. For more info, visit themeateater.com.
We're giving away the secrets to our method of digitally and physically finding big bucks on public ground.
This mini-series is powered by onX, and we deep dive into what we look for on a map, how we scout it in person, and what pins we use to help us effectively hunt deer.
This is
Public Pins.
Call me the Joker, call me the fool.
Right now we are on a road trip, actually on a trip back home from being on a road trip. One of the things you do on a road trip a lot is eat out. So there's this kind of thing where you do like this staging where you kind of find the place that you're going to eat and kind of map scout and navigate your way there, right? And deer do the same thing, okay? They think about the place they're going to go eat, and then they kind of like work their way there, and they like try to decide. They like look at the menu, right? So they do this thing where what'd you call it? It's food source staging, right? And it's really kind of how to hunt food sources, but we're looking at it from a map scout perspective, right? So Tyler, what is going on with food source staging?
So food source staging is basically the staging that happens prior to deer entering a destination food source. Destination food source being a lot of times a corn or bean field or an alfalfa field or a wheat field where these deer are going to spend most of the night, if not all the night some nights. And so prior to entering that field, they will a lot of times kind of mill around and stage adjacent to that field in an area that for some reason fits their needs. Usually it has to do with a little bit of cover and maybe another food source as well. And it just allows them to get up and stretch their legs when they get antsy right before dark, and still stay in the cover for a little while before they actually expose themselves.
Yeah, we actually this week, we've been up in northeastern Illinois, and one day on this trip we found a place just like this, right, where we went and located some a wheat field. But at this time of year you can still tell it was in wheat because it is still wheat. They harvest it like in late spring whenever it finally develops. So we kind of hiked in a little ways to go to the spot and found a ton of deer sound around this spot, right? Like it's just the perfect example. What did you see in there?
Besides hunter sign, I saw lots of rubs.
Yeah.
That was one of the things I noticed. I saw scrapes. I saw trails. I saw actually just a spider web of trails, man, like nothing too particular. So because it's cover, I think they're not necessarily too concerned with like being on a specific trail in there. You know what I mean? When they're messing around and when they're coming up, approaching these field edges, I guess. The rubs were what stuck out to me the most, and I think it's probably just bucks just during the rut hanging out there before they go out to the field and just letting loose a little steam probably.
Yeah.
What about you? Anything you noticed that I didn't notice there?
I think that's probably about it. It's just a place. It's going to be sign heavy.
Yeah.
You know, that's kind of the thing with these places.
What situation do you like hunting or would you like hunting food sources or food source staging in
Late season, I think.
yeah.
I mean, there's always a bell curve to this stuff, right? You can, for instance, in South Dakota last year, I shot a deer in a food source staging area on October 4th or 5th. I can't remember.
Which early season tends to hunt like late season a lot of times.
It kind of does.
You know?
It kind of does. They're just on a bed to feed pattern at that point in time. And he was headed to alfalfa, and it was perfect, right? And then, like, I think middle of the rut,
we shot deer on the same day doing the same thing.
I know it,
much,
dude.
You know?
Yeah, for real. And I think, middle of the rut, you could still do it. It probably wouldn't be quite as effective. There's other things other places I would rather be. But late season especially, they're such just slaves to their stomach because everything is dead except for the crops or, whatever they're finding to eat. Maybe you got late drop acorns or persimmons or whatever. They really, really are going to key in on this stuff. And you can still hunt bucks that are checking does, but it just so happens those does have really moved to some of these places where they're staging up. We're getting ready to go feed in a big field.
Yeah. Do you feel like because of the foliage drop that late season food source staging areas look different than early October food source staging areas?
I don't hunt the early October ones much around the house, so my experience is a little bit limited, kind of to just last year's hunt in South Dakota. But I would say that yes, because those deer were walking through shoulder-high tall grasses to get to that spot, so they were real comfortable walking around. I think that staging area is actually going to shift down a lot closer to their bedding, and they're going to wait to cross that open field later, pretty much after dark to get to that food source. They're a staging area is going to kind of be like the best decent cover that they can feel comfortable in until it's time to go out into the field. And sometimes deer feel comfortable going out in the field in daylight, but a lot of times, no matter what, they'll still go to a staging area and kind of like smell or observe and just make sure it's a good time to go out there.
It's kind of like if you've ever hunted dove, they'll go sit on a power line over a sunflower field before they actually dive into the sunflowers because they want to look around and see if there's a bobcat down there or something, waiting to pounce on them. So they kind of sit where they feel comfortable until they have to kind of stick their necks out a little bit, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly.
Where does this go ahead?
Well, this is the kind of one of those silly examples we like to do, but you ever been at a restaurant and it's like a pretty long wait or something, and then you see people leaving who are dissatisfied or something, and you're like, maybe I shouldn't go here, and it's kind of the same kind of deal, know, and I think bucks will do that too, where they'll let does go out into the field even while they're there, and they just kind of wait. And they like to see if those does are cool out there.
I agree. I mean, my dad used to always tell me one of his big pieces of advice when I first started hunting was don't ever shoot the first buck that comes out because there's probably going to be a bigger one, and it's kind of one of those deals where like a lot of times you see the matriarch doe walking in the back, and a lot of times you see the the big buck comes out after the littler buck comes out,
Yeah, absolutely.
So, it's just kind of the way they are, a little more wary of stuff like that. So where does food source staging rank for you?
I think
1
it's
to 10.
a little lower, and that's going to be seasonally dependent. Late season on a really cold day, it probably is one of the best places to be. But in general, when I think of the list of the stuff that I'm excited to hunt or that I utilize a whole lot, it's a little lower.
Really?
It's probably like in that 6 to 7 range, something like that.
I'd say for me, it actually ranks kind of higher. And we've probably been in the same boat on all these so far that we've done, but it ranks pretty high for me. I like to kind of, one of my things that I like to do when I go out of state is find the destination food plot for that night or the food source for that night, and then take and go, okay, where can I kill a buck at though? Because I'm not going to kill him probably right there, but I can back off a little bit, and if I can find a place that I feel like is secondary staging and I can get a tree stand hung and it's blowing the wind in the right direction from where I think he's coming, I feel like my chances of killing a buck are high that evening. And so I think it ranks pretty high for me, but I think there's also, it's one of those things like we talked about with saddles where like if you can match it up with a couple other variables that really make you feel good about the spot that you're in, it really starts to to feel good, you know. And
I think that was my next point, is that I think sometimes I might be hunting food source staging and not even realize it, because I'm hunting the scrape or the trail that's there because of the food source. You know, like for instance, the deer I killed in Kansas this year, technically I was hunting right next to a wheat field that I was hunting food source staging. It just so happens I grunted the deer in and he was pretty rutted up, so he really wasn't kind of headed to the food. He was cruising, but it's still the same scenario. I think a lot of this stuff kind of has a little bit of crossover.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, these are deer don't act like a dot-to-dot map. You know, they're not just gonna now I have food source staged, so I'm going to move out to the field.
Exactly.
You know, like there's no. It's just like, one deer made a move. You know,
check my scrape box for the day, so I'm done with that. You know,
This is not like people. Okay, like people are like, it's 12 o'clock. I got to go eat lunch.
Yeah.
Okay, now 12:30. I've got to be back at the office.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
It's not that way. These deer have nothing to do but survive.
Yeah. Well, you said yours is a little bit different than mine. What's your number for that?
Man, I would actually rank it pretty high. I would rank it up there real close to scrapes. And like you said, there's crossover, right? Like a lot of times in these food source staging areas, you're going to find a ton of sign most of the time. I would say because they just are hanging out there for at least 15 minutes a lot of times, if not longer. So they're getting to a point where a lot of times I think of it as they're getting to a point where they're getting close to the edge, the field edge, and they know that they can't go much further without exposing themselves. So they really slow down at that point. You know, it's not something that they're making a scrape on the way to. They're standing there and they're like, okay, well, this smells like something I should lick and, do something with. So, and the same thing with rubbing and stuff, you know?
Is that how you're identifying this stuff? Like, on the map, how are you finding like a food source staging spot on the map?
I think it definitely to me starts with the food source. So when I go, like for instance, when I was in Illinois last year, I killed a deer the first evening that I hunted, but the morning before that evening, that morning I drove and I marked crops in every field because what I was looking for is really, I was looking for corn. I wanted to hunt corn because the beans I felt like were starting to turn pretty good and felt like they weren't going to be a great food source. And so I was marking different colors on my map. I was marking corn was yellow and beans were brown. And then there was a little bit of wheat in the area. I marked it with the teal because that's the only green kind of thing they had. And so I got a map full of those colors all around this area that I spent a lot of time driving and stuff. So essentially, everything that wasn't yellow was kind of off the board for me, or that didn't border yellow. You know what I mean? So then when I look at that and I go, okay, when I'm looking at a place to hunt, if I hadn't killed that evening, on the next day, I don't feel good about the spot I was sitting or something, then I pull up my yellows and I start looking and zooming in on them, and immediately I think that anything that sets up to be between where I would assume deer are bedding and the cornfield, the food source essentially, that is also really close to the food source in my opinion, is that food source staging. Like I think of it as kind of the last stop before they're eating as opposed to like the, somewhere that they would, because I think like you could think of it like this too, is like a buck could get up fairly early in the afternoon because he's got a few things on his mind, right? He's going to end up at food, but he may be thinking the first thing he wants to do is at 150 yards, there's a doe family group that usually beds over there or something, you know what I mean, on this little thicket of honeysuckle. And he makes a little jaunt over there, and he checks that. Those does didn't bed there that day or whatever, which to some of the Midwesterners might sound crazy, but we actually don't have deer that bed in the same spot every day. So, but anyway, then he would go and kind of work his way over to food source. So you could say that he's staging in a few different areas if you wanted to get, if you wanted to argue about it, I guess.
Yeah.
But to me, the food source staging is what happens right before they enter a food source, essentially.
Yeah. So one of the things that I'll probably add to like the maps scouting portion of that is that bedding and food source staging areas sometimes look a little different. I feel like on an aerial version of what you're looking at here, kind of open big timber is a good staging spot as opposed to like thickets, right? And they'll utilize what they have to get next to food, right? But like that's what we found this week, is that it was kind of big timber that didn't have a ton of understory, so deer could see. They want what they want to do is they want to go up, kind of pull up to this ag field and look out there and see if anything's wrong. And they can't do that whenever there's a whole hedgerow all the way around the thing and they can't see through it.
It's a good point, man. I like that a lot, because I think even a lot of times, we talked about this in doe bedding and stuff, but like the does can bed right on the edge of the field sometimes, and they will. And it's usually, some does are weird, but sometimes
so weird.
Sometimes, a lot of times, they will bed actually in a pretty thick little thing by the edge of the field. But I can see and have seen in lots of instances where they'll get up and they will still stage, so they'll go down the fence line to that little park-like area that you're talking about, and it may be 100 yards or whatever, and they'll go down the fence line, and then they'll enter from there into the fields, just so that they can kind of stretch their legs, get their bearings, and do the same thing, like you said, approach and see, and instead of just busting out from the thickest cover into the wide open when they don't know if a tractor is out there or a coyote or whatever,
dude with a gun,
dude
all
with
that
a gun.
stuff, And I think this is another place where you can kind of do some crossover with this. But if you can pair one of our fence crossing ideas with this food source staging, then you really have a money spot for a spot you can shoot a deer.
Yeah, and we talked a lot in the fence cross portion about deer, moving in open country, in these fence crosses in open country, and I think that in that type of country, a lot of times you see that food source staging to be a little bit further away sometimes. Those deer are used to moving for any kind of resources a lot of times, and especially if you're talking about a buck. And so, if I was thinking about food source staging and identifying that on a map in more open country, then a lot of times I'm just looking for that food source, and then I backtrack to a plum thicket or something that it could be thick CRP too, but like something that gives them the cover that they need to essentially, be hidden and stop for a second and look, you know what I mean? And to disappear quickly if they need to. So that's there's a couple of different ways to find it, but I think your idea about the open timber being a place that they like to kind of stage a lot is good. And I think that you can also pair that with, like, say, a lone white oak that's putting off, or for us, a persimmon or something like that. A lot of times you can find those. For some people, maybe an apple tree or whatever that is dropping in that staging area, so they get a little diversity. They like to browse. They don't like to eat wheat all night.
They like an appetizer.
But they do like a little appetizer. Yeah, and I think that's something to look for as well. If you can pair that together, then you've really got one of those places you can feel good about. Now, when you get there, what are some of the things that you're looking for and when you're scouting, when you're trying to find, the spot that is the food staging area on the ground, and then also, like, talk about the practically hunting it and how it relates to that.
Well, I think you want to do the whole be the deer thing. You want to stand in a spot and say, does this suit my needs for being able to feel hidden but also see what's going on out there, right? You want to be able to do that, and then I think that you want to see a bunch of sign. You might even want to see some beds, because a lot of time, I have a late season hunt that didn't air yet for last season where I had some does come in and do this exact thing. They browsed their way in and bedded for like 30 minutes right underneath my stand because they were waiting to go to a feeder that was on private land next to the public I was hunting. And they just bedded down, and you could, clear as day, when they got up, see the little depressions that they made, and then you pair that with, buck sign, deer poopies. They like to poopy after they get up from bedding all day.
They duke in spots that they stand for a second a lot of times. You know what I mean? It's like something. It's one of those things. It's just something to do. You know what I mean? It's something that they're doing. Like when they're standing there, they're just like, I kind of got to let something go here.
Get this out of here, so I make more room for this wheat.
That's right. Yeah, that's another thing. I think there's some kind of biological thing there where they're getting hungry, and it's like kind of a make room kind of deal. Especially if they're browsing around right there and they just got up from bed and they've been digesting all day. You know what I mean?
They got them some fiber when they got up.
That's
what they're doing.
That's right.
But I think, just a bunch of sign next to ag is just, it's a surefire way to know that you're in one of these staging areas.
I agree. I think, man, you make some good points, dude. I think that those are the beds is something I didn't even think about, but like, yeah, dude, like just you talk about like on a cold day sometimes, man, the deer get antsy. They want to get out of bed. They're just tired of sitting there being freezing and just kind of bored or whatever you want to call it. And they get up early, but then they get to the edge of the field and they're like, oh, we can't go out now. Like, it's bright, and then people are getting home from school and stuff, you know. There's lots
the
of
mailman
noise.
went by, I can't go out there. Yeah, that kind of thing. Well, what do you do to convert that into like huntability?
In the case of where you're talking about in your video that hadn't released yet, you just get smelled all the time. That place is a difficult place to hunt.
It kind of is.
And I think you could run into that, but I think what you've got going for you is you've got an open field. There are places in the open field that deer are going to typically spend more time a lot of times. And it's usually in a corner or a little pocket or next to a finger of timber or something like that. Or, you know, even if you think about the obtuse side of a corner, I guess, of timber that sticks out into the field, you know, right there possibly. And so you've got to try to blow your wind, I think, on an evening hunt out to the field, but you've got to try to keep it off the does because they're probably going to be the first ones there.
Yeah.
And so there's also other cases where you could blow it kind of perpendicular to a fence line if you know that deer aren't going to come from a certain direction, you know. A lot of times in ag country, you've got homesteads that you can hunt pretty close to, and deer know when, you know, that they know how far the distance is they need to be from that homestead to feel comfortable, right? And it's closer than you think sometimes. And so I think you could blow your wind at a homestead and it kind of be something that if a deer did pass between you and the homestead, it might feel like, you know, it's kind of that residential deer kind of thing. It's like they don't quite understand that it's different than anything that's ever gone on right there.
I don't know if he's going to appreciate me doxing him like this, but Onyx's own Jared Larson, him and I were texting about a place, our stand locations last fall. And I was in just this nasty thicket, and I knew I wasn't going to see any deer because I didn't like it once I hung there, but it's too late to go anywhere else. And then Jared sends me a selfie of him in his place, and I see behind him, I was like, bro, is that a mobile home right there? And the dude was like, you know, 50 yards off of a little homestead right there, you know, and he was seeing deer.
Yeah.
You know, like it doesn't always
those
have to be way
homesteads,
back.
And that's the thing is like historical homesteads have a lot of brush and timber around them a lot of times. They created hedgerows back in the Depression days for, I guess, like stimulus and also to keep the Dust Bowl down and to also to keep the north wind from just biting your face off when you went to your truck or whatever, you know, or saddled up your horses. So like at this point, those things are, I mean, the homestead is the brushiest spot. So the deer have a ton of cover right there. And so they can just slip out from there into the field. So, I mean, there's some opportunities there to hunt near that kind of thing. Plus, you've got stand trees that are big enough now, you know, that have grown near those homesteads to hunt out of. So, just some thoughts there about like that. I mean, as far as hunting it, you know, you kind of have a good idea of the direction that the deer are going to come from a lot of times. Obviously, from the woods or the timber or the grass, you know, to the open ag field a lot of times. And sometimes, you know, like for instance, last year in Texas, I shot a public land buck that was coming to a food source, and his staging was a bunch of CRP grass, and I actually killed him at the food source. But I mean, sometimes your food source doesn't look like an ag field, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Sometimes it looks like a plum thicket, which, you know, if you're hunting then, you're probably illegally hunting out of season. But it could look like an apple orchard or something like that too. So, you know, there's different things there. Now, as far as marking these spots and when you go in there to scout them, what are you thinking in regards to that?
Yeah, well, you had a really good point about marking all the different types of food sources earlier with different icons. I think that looked real good. That sounded real good. Then you can just always mark that staging area as, I think I would probably mark something like that, like just a general deer icon or something, or probably just one of those white hots, you know?
Yeah.
And then go in there and then mark the sign and then the fence crossings and stuff, because you really can't like mark staging because it's not a one particular pin. It's an area, right? And if you wanted to like really go crazy with the Onyx app, which you can, you could do one of those shapes, and show like this whole thing, like this 4 acres is really the big staging area or whatever,
It's a good idea.
Personally, I don't use that too much in that situation. I use that a little bit more for gardening and stuff like that at my house, but it is something you can do. I like to be able, it does put a color over the area, so you can't quite see the aerial as well, but you could still use that to just, once you're in there, maybe figure out the size of it, and then have an idea of the general area or how big it is. But I think going in there and just marking all the sign that you find important, like marking individual rubs might help you later retrospectively put the bigger pieces together. But quite honestly, rubs are kind of like the thing that I think about the least besides poopies. Like I don't think much more than saying, oh, look, that's a place that a buck rubbed a tree, and there's some caveats to that. And that's kind of a different podcast, like a perennial rub means something, and the sides of the tree means a little something, but for the most part, it's just like a thing that show that there's a good sign in there, right? And then the scrapes that you find in there are going to be more important, and even more so the trails and the fence crossings. Like those are the things that you really, really need to take note of. Yeah,
and we've talked about it, but like you're going to have multiple trails in there. Like this is what we saw the other day, right? Mm-hmm. Lots of trails going lots of different directions. There are a few that stick out big time a lot of times. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? A lot of times you're going to have 2 trails. If you say you got a corner of timber, like we were talking about, we were looking at coming into some ag, and you've got 30 trails technically that are coming in there. 3 of them are going to be better than the others probably. Yeah. And so I think you definitely want to mark those trails, but as important as anything, you want to mark those fence crossings, because that's where, for a bow hunter, that's where it all ties in. Now, if you're a gun hunter, I mean, you may be able to, this may be a great spot for you, really, because you're talking about an area that we talked about being like park-like, so big timber, kind of not a whole lot of brush underneath sometimes. And, if this area is 100 yards wide, you may be able to shoot the whole thing, So that's, I guess, a reason to use the shape tool, is that you can figure out about, how wide this thing is. And if you're a rifle hunter, then you know what you can get away with, and you're trying to get shots that go throughout the whole thing.
I'll tell you something else you can do. We don't do this very often. I've done it just a few times, but it's pretty handy, is you can turn your tracker tool on and walk the deer trail. And then, because you can mark with the icon a trail, but trails are not specific points. They're lines, or they're crooked lines, right? So if you, like, say, for instance, find the fence crossing and you want to backtrack, you can just go to that fence crossing, hit your tracker on your phone, and then walk the trail, and then you can save that, and you'll have a really good idea. Say you find those 3 main trails you're talking about, of like the 3 main arteries that the deer are using to get in there.
Yeah, and I'll tell you this, man, sometimes when you do stuff like that, it just enlightens you in a way that you just wouldn't have had. When you see 3 trails on there that are lit up like that, then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I can blow my wind that way. Yeah. You know what I mean? I can blow it right there, because it actually doesn't. Because I'm just telling you, when you get around corners and like for the most part in farm country, like you've got very east and west and north and south fence line. You know what I mean? But sometimes you don't, and sometimes when a creek system goes by that fence line or kind of parallels it, it can throw you off if you can't quite see the fence line as to where actually east and west is. And so I just think that, man, it's like, there's just places I know that I've thought about them particular ways. Babylon, one of our spots, being that way, where, like, the way I've always thought about it for some reason is that it lays out maybe 20 degrees off of what it actually lays out. You know what I mean? It's like it just lays a little bit more diagonal than it does east and west cardinal direction or whatever. Yeah. And so when you start to see the lines and the dots come together, sometimes that makes you think, it enlightens you, like I said, to where you can actually blow your wind. So I think there's some good tips there. I would definitely, like we kind of always mentioned, to mark your tree. If you are in this food source staging area and it has big trees, big timber, like we mentioned, then a lot of times you've got lots of stand trees. So there's good opportunities. I think the best option sometimes is if you got 3 trails that are main trails coming into this thing, is to try to at least shoot 2 of them if you're a bow hunter. You know what I mean? And try to get away with that, because that's sometimes the best you can do. You know, if trails are, 80, 90, 100 yards apart, you can still get 2 of them a lot of times, but that third one's going to be out there,
Another little hunting anecdote here would be that this might be one of the places to bring all 4 sticks in.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times, if you're talking about bigger trees and places that aren't quite as thick on the understory, you might not have quite as much cover. So being up, 18, 20 feet probably isn't a bad idea either. As, you and I hunt a lot at 12 and 13 just because we hunt kind of, the low country down there, in Texas, just on some creek bottoms a lot. But it's one of those things where, even if you have a climber stand, it might be a good spot to kind of bring that in as opposed to some of your other stuff, because you can go as high as you want to.
For sure. And I think, another thing that I like about this type of spot is that hardly ever do I feel as good about going in and setting up and not bumping deer as I do in one of these, because that like when they're going to end up here before dark, like right before dark most of the time, you know what I mean? So you're going to get in there. A lot of times you can walk the edge of the field all the way down to the spot, and you're not bumping deer, as you go in. So you can feel really, really bulletproof when you go in. It's a great spot to hunt. Like I said, it ranks pretty high on my spectrum of places to hunt and public land pens.
If you're into this kind of stuff and feel like you need more, you can check out our Map Scout Challenge series on YouTube. These are the most comprehensive scouting videos on the internet.
Make sure and subscribe while you're there, and also remember, this is your element.
Live in it.
The new Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook Wild Game Recipes for the Grill, Smoker, Campfire, and Camp Stove is out on April 24th and is available for pre-order now. Here is your book for everything that's best cooked or eaten outside. From grilling to open fire cooking to Dutch ovens to smokers to barbecue to backpacking meals to how to pull off the perfect fish fry, with pit stops along the way for lessons about Ice Age cooking methods and the best 5 ways to construct a cooking fire you can be proud of. And of course, we're focusing on wild game and fish here with over 100 recipes, including stuffed venison burgers 3 ways, wild duck with ahi verde sauce, a jerky made with cola, a gin and tonic made with fire-charred lemons, and grilled frog legs made with a sticky sweet sauce. This ain't your normal cookbook, so be prepared to be surprised. Pre-order your copy now. For more info, visit themeateater.com.